Good evening and welcome to the September 9th, 2014 meeting of the Zoning Design and Review Board. We will call this meeting to order. And Sandra, if you could have roll call to start.
Member Scoggins.
Present.
Member Cook.
Here.
Member James.
Here.
Chair Durham.
Here.
Let the record reflect that Member Laz has been excused.
Thank you. And we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And any comments or changes for the agenda?
No.
If not, make a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Thank you. In a second.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? So it's unanimous. Approval of the minutes, which
I didn't
there
see.
were none in there. So
Yeah. Sorry about that.
that's all
It'll be
right.
the
So
next
we
time.
will hold that off till the next meeting then for 4. I'm going to go right over the public comment and consent calendar and public hearings, and we will go straight to number 8 for 8.1, the ZDRB role, authority, and processes here in Yountville. Sandra?
All right. So, at a Zoning and Design Review Board meeting earlier this year, Chair Durham had commented on attendance at the League of California Cities Planning Commissioners Academy, and he raised the question of whether the ZDRB should transition to a more typical planning commission. And there was some discussion amongst the members. Member James commented that he didn't think it was necessary in a community such as Yountville. And Member Cook felt that maybe we needed better qualified members. And there was really no consensus as to that meeting, but it was determined that we would come back before you and raise some items in a workshop format so that you can discuss them related to your role as a ZDRB and the authority you have, possibly expanding that role, and then other items of interest related to application processing, such as the Master Development Plan. So the ZDRB is a body that discusses planning matters and considers public comment and offers recommendations to the Town Council. You serve in a decision-making body for a certain category of applications, mainly residential projects, and that includes single-family residences or multifamily projects for single-lot development. You make decisions on variances and sign permits, and any decision of the ZDRB can be appealed to the council. On the other hand, you serve in an advisory capacity for a number of different items, and those relate to design review for commercial applications, design review for residential development of 5 or more units or a subdivision of 5 or more units. You also make recommendations on use permits in all districts, and then on policy matters such as changes to the general plan or amendments to the zoning, design, or subdivision ordinances. In the staff report, I do note that there are some projects that don't come before you, and that's in response to Member Cook's query as to why not all items are brought before this board, although these tend to be of a more minor nature. They're design review that's deemed to be minor and incidental. It could apply to a small addition, a residential or commercial addition, that doesn't result in a noticeable change to a front elevation, or changes to side and rear elevations do not increase the roof line or intrude the privacy of other uses on adjacent lots. It could include residential re-landscaping or the placement of outdoor art. It also includes replacement signs that are in substantial conformity with an approved sign permit or master sign plan, temporary structure permits, and then also minor changes to approved projects. And when these are approved by staff, it's by a vehicle of a notice of pending action that's posted in the 3 posting locations in town, that's mailed to affected property owners, and then also copies are provided to both to the town council and the ZDRB, and there's a 10-day appeal period so that staff's decision could be appealed. And in my whole time with the town, there's only been one instance of a notice of pending action being appealed. And in that case, the applicant abandoned the project rather than bringing it back before the decision makers. So the first question relates to whether the ZDRB would like to transition to a planning commission. And planning commissions play a central role in California planning law, and they really do three things. First, that the commission acts as an advisory body to the council on all matters related to land use and development. The ZDRB, the Planning Commission also assures that the general plan is implemented, and that's done by looking at, on a case-by-case basis, at applications. And a Planning Commission also has decision-making authority over some items. And I'm sure you're thinking, well, that sounds similar to what we do, and it's true. The ZDRB is sort of a hybrid model where you make some decisions, and the council makes others, and then the council itself is sort of a hybrid of a planning commission because they're not stuck with typical or strictly town council roles. So one key difference is the type of decisions that these two different boards make. Planning commissions make findings based on fact. It's when they're sitting in a quasi-judicial role, and your decisions are all based on findings. They're all very factual, although you do make recommendations as to policy in that with that legislative hat. On the other hand, a town council tends to be more of a political body, and they're the policy group that establishes the general plan and things of that nature. In some jurisdictions, planning commissions simply advise the legislative body, but it's more typical that they make all of the land use decisions. And like I said, in Yountville, it's sort of a hybrid model where certain residential projects are approved by the ZDRB, as are variances and sign permits, but everything of a more significant nature or larger nature are decided by the council. So on page 2 of the staff report, I list some of the typical tasks that are delegated to planning commissions, and it's assisting in the writing of the general plan, holding hearings on amendments to the general plan, and on zoning ordinances and maps, annually reviewing a jurisdiction's CIP, and really making land use decisions. So with that in mind, a question for the ZDRB is whether they'd like to consider changing that role to be a more typical planning commission. If not, one of the questions before you is, well, how could the ZDRB expand its role to have its hands on a few more items? And one of the things I've identified in the staff report are potentially use permits, because all of those go before the council. And granted, you do see use permits when it's connected to a master development plan that comes before you. That's a component of it. But where there's a use permit that is a use permit only, say for a developed structure where design review isn't included, it would go straight to council. They'd also hear certain residential use permit requests. And I'll give you an example of some of those residential requests would relate to non-conforming uses, so an expansion of the use or an expansion of a building, or even home occupation. So that's something potentially that the ZDRB could be making decisions on. The question is whether you would like to make those decisions outright or stay more in the advisory capacity when it relates to those two different categories of residential and commercial, and that would be in keeping with sort of the structure that's already been established. And then just to wrap up this section, I did know that there are certain use permit applications that don't come before either the ZDRB or the council based on either the zoning district because it's permitted outright, or because it's a minor change that's approved at staff level. So the last item we want you to consider tonight is with regards to the master development plan process. And as you know, this is really long and complex. It includes up to 5 different steps starting with conceptual, moving on to preliminary, and then the final master development plan. And master development plan review is required for all new and expanded commercial development and subdivisions or developments of 5 lots or more. So it just are those 2 categories that fall under this. And the conceptual stage is intended to be a discussion and informal review that sort of establishes the direction of the project before an applicant makes a submittal. This is a voluntary stage, and an applicant decides to do it when they want a little more feedback before putting the time and money into doing drawings and making a formal application. Very often they get great feedback from the council and might make changes before making that formal submittal. The next stage is the preliminary one, and it's intended to establish the overall site layout and the general building design. And it works better for some projects than others. For a residential subdivision where you have streets and lot sizes and orientation and site improvements, getting this all worked out early on is important because then you follow it up with the specifics as to the design. It's really less useful for infill lots in Yountville, the vacant commercial parcels, because when an applicant comes up with a concept there, they generally just want to proceed, and a lot of the same issues don't apply that need to be worked out early on. The last stage is the final stage, and it's intended to finalize all the details of the building design and site layout, the parking and circulation, the landscaping, lighting, but also the building uses. So it puts a lot of information into that final stage that goes before the town council. And it generally has a heavier focus on design because that hasn't been quite finalized, or it hasn't until that point. And uses can become somewhat overlooked or just squeezed into too much of a discussion. And that includes really the operational aspects of a use, such as special events and employee parking management, all of those things that could really use a little extra time. So staff believes there may be value in changing this, the process, not necessarily streamlining it so much as separating it out into design and use elements, with the design going both to ZDRB and council, and then the use coming back at a separate hearing at the council, in order to really work through some of those operational issues and make sure that they're not overlooked as part of the early on process. So we're asking that you have a workshop discussion tonight to really go over these 3 issues. I've tried to summarize them in the conclusion, asking, is there any interest on behalf of the ZDRB to transition to a more traditional planning commission? If there isn't interest, is the commission interested in expanding its role to include review of all use permit applications? And then if so, would you approach residential and commercial projects differently? And lastly, do you see, are you satisfied with the master development plan process, or would you like to see us look at any changes to that in the future? So that concludes my staff report.
Thank you, Sandra. Commissioner Cook, do you have any questions of the staff at the moment?
Sandra, I guess my only question is on the master development plan, the way it currently works. Is the ZDRB involved in that process?
Yes.
Only for design review?
No.
Okay.
For both preliminary and final, it comes before the ZDRB when an applicant has decided to do all 4 of those steps. In cases where we see infill development, most often an applicant elects to combine them, so it's all heard only once in front of the ZDRB and then the council.
And
if it's a subdivision like Vineyard Oaks, that's one that wouldn't really qualify for the combining of the preliminary and final, so it would go to a total of 4 hearings, 2 here and 2 at the town council.
And it's up to the applicant which stages they want to present?
No, not necessarily, but we offer an option for streamline review when it's a type of project that really could benefit from that, or it's a type of project that we feel could be combined.
Okay. But sometimes the complicated ones don't end up going through the preliminary stages, right?
Right. Well, Stuart Cellars was an example of that.
Yeah.
And that was a major redevelopment with 3 buildings and a lot of uses, and so it was a lot of information.
Yeah, it was. Okay.
Commissioner Janes, any questions?
Yes, I'd like to define the terms or better understand them somewhat. One of the statements you make in the staff report is that California state law permits local jurisdictions to assign certain duties to a planning commission. So I read that sentence, may assign to indicate permission, not an obligation. So is the nomenclature, is the name of the body that terribly important? Is becoming a planning commission somehow limiting the town's hands with what it can assign? Is it being a board that is a constraint? I mean, could we call ourselves anything, and it's really just simply up to the council to assign the duties irrespective of whether it's a commission or a board?
Essentially, yes. The discussion of a planning commission is more in terms of what is typically found throughout California, in terms of what those bodies do. But as we know from this whole discussion is that a ZDRB and a planning commission are pretty similar to one another, and that's because there's great leeway in local jurisdictions deciding how these duties and tasks are assigned. So it doesn't really make any difference either way.
There are no required duties of either body based on the name. If we were to be a planning commission, we would suddenly, Yountville's a general law city, right?
Correct?
Correct.
Yes.
So if this
We're
body were
required-
termed a planning commission, would it have required duties?
No, because under California law, we're required to make planning decisions.
Can I clarify? This town is required to have a planning commission component. That, in our current situation, the statutorial duties are actually performed by the council functioning as the planning commission. So I want to make that clarification. So you're absolutely correct. The way state law is written is the power stays with the town council or a city council. They are able to delegate it. And when you look at the enabling legislation that many cities have, there are some nuances with each of them in how their planning commission or planning board may actually be constructed and some of the nuances to how they go about it. But the one thing is state law does have certain things that incorporated entities are responsible for. And land use planning is one of the key elements that an incorporated entity is responsible for. So what I would say, Sandra is correct, when we have a hybrid situation, you are sort of a planning commission light. And the reason I say that is the manner in which the applicants bring material in, staff processes it and reviews it, in all candor, is really no different than if you were to take those similar projects and have that experience in a community where it would be going before the Planning Commission. The difference here is you have a limited role based, again, and correct as a member James mentioned, what was identified as a role by the council. Ultimately, all of that will be determined by the council. So part of the broader question is, and we look at this as an appropriate way to ensure that the commission's engaged and that it's serving a vital purpose. And I said this the last time we were having this discussion, and I'm going to say it again. All of you are more than competent and qualified to serve on a planning commission. The process that communities use throughout the state of California to select and appoint their planning commission members is no different in what they're looking for. They're looking for people generally that have a background, an interest, and most importantly, a concern for the quality of life in their community. So I would put the 5 of you against any community in the Planning Commission, and some of you have participated in a couple of the workshops that we had, and I think, so I just say, it's really a role, and part of it is we're trying to look at bringing you more activities, more things to discuss. We are reaching build-out, so the number of applications that you're going to see is going to look different. And part of that is where are we going in terms with that. So it's just some real thoughts, but from a functional standpoint, there are certain things that have to occur in the planning process. And what I will also say, and we probably have a council member or two watching tonight, at times one of the challenging things for the council is technically a legislative body. They have to put on a very different hat in the middle of a council meeting, which is their quasi-judicial hat. That's challenging because it's a whole different approach to the process of making a decision based on fact rather than legislative. And in most planning commissions, the ultimate control still rests with the city or town council. And that's why there's almost, well, I'm not going to say almost always, there is always an appeal process and a procedure, very similar to what we currently have. If an applicant doesn't like the outcome or a decision that you've made, they have the right and the ability to move it forward to the council for the ultimate decision. And all planning commission bylaws and structures have that kind of a process in place. So this is really more of a check-in. The conversation's been kind of around for a couple years, and I just think it's an appropriate one, and this may be a starting dialogue a little to look at that. And if you remember, it's probably been 3 years ago now that we started to have the role of the ad hoc committees to try to work on some different topics. And this one sort of started a little conversation and then didn't go for a variety of reasons. And this is more of a check-in, and I would remind everybody that, you know, if all of you are thrilled and said, yes, we want to completely reconstitute and rewrite everything, we still have another body that we have to check in with that may or may not. So I'm just saying it's really part of that, but it is something that what I would say is we are in the minority in the current structure. I mean, the town of Yountville with the council serving as a planning commission is in a very small minority, whereas the traditional planning commission, as the director referred to it, is probably the norm in about 97% of the California cities.
How would you characterize that percentage compared to municipalities like Yountville?
Actually, that's a very good question, and I think the answer is still the same. Most of those cities still have a planning commission. Where you will find those that are combined or resting with the council, they do tend to rest actually in very small communities. For example, Tehama, Plymouth. So they may not necessarily have some of the same complexities or issues, but I don't want to, there's nothing wrong, and that's the other thing everybody needs to realize. The current process Yountville has put in place was thoughtfully put in place a number of years ago, and in some ways it served the community really well. I think what we're seeing now is an interest on the part of some of the members to perhaps say, is it time for us to revisit and look at differently some of the decisions and look at the processes and how we might best serve the needs of Yountville going forward for the next 50 years? And that's a good, healthy dialogue. And it may be that we have a discussion and say this is still the best way to work for us, or we may have some tweaks that we want to make along the way to better reflect the interests of the residents at this point. And that's the beauty of why you are a citizen advisory panel and helping to shape and have influence over that dialogue.
Thank you. Commissioner Janes, any other questions?
Not at this time, no.
Thank you. Commissioner Scoggins, any questions?
Mr. Rogers answered quite a few of them, but I guess I don't know if you can answer this. Do we have any indication from the council members, city council members, town council members, I should say, which way are they pushing for this, or do we even have any clue about where their heads are
No,
at?
it's as the town manager mentioned, it's an issue that's been floating out there for a while that hasn't really been addressed, so we thought we'd approach it. I should have mentioned that after this meeting, what I intend to do is convene a meeting of the ZDRB ad hoc committee, and that's with 2 members of the ZDRB and 2 members of the council to discuss, the recommendation of the ZDRB here and have further discussion before we take it to council, if at all, if there's a desire in making any changes. But it's the process that we're hoping to go through. So no, I don't really know how the town council feels about it.
Okay. And just to be clear, Steve, what you said was that if we all said, yes, absolutely, let's make the change, we would still have to get it ratified or...
Right, that approval doesn't
Got it.
end
Yep.
here. Yeah.
I think in part answer to your question, Member Scoggins, I would refer to the fact that the council established the ad hoc committee with the intent of working with 2 members of the council, 2 members, although some of the constitution of the membership may have changed in that time. So I think there was a willingness to look at the issue and discuss change. I don't know if there was I wouldn't say that there's an understanding or an agreement to what that change might be, and it could simply be that there's additional duties and it doesn't change. That could be an outcome, but there definitely was a willingness amongst the body to sit down and have a discussion about how best to use the talents of the Zoning and Design Review Board members.
It seems that, to your earlier point, that they have to put on a quasi, I can't remember the term, judicial,
Pardon me.
that it just seems like maybe I would assume maybe they are interested in kind of offloading that, if that's what we're saying.
Well, I think that's a conversation that hasn't been had. Certainly, it would be a role change for the council because, one, they would have to be willing to conceptually let go of a decision that currently they're making. And I can't say that they are or they aren't.
Right.
But they're not giving up control because ultimately, typically when you look at the appeals process includes members of the Planning Commission, the applicant, people that may be opposed to the project, as well as an individual council member. I mean, there's some varieties, but typically that includes those elements are all part of that process. So it's a pretty wide open opportunity if somebody feels that they didn't get a fair evaluation or consideration by the Planning Commission. So it's a change, and I will say that may not be an easy change for the council. A number of our council members came up from this very august body. They spent time and tenure in this as a zoning design review board. But when you do look at the typical nature of most communities and their legislative body, the legislative body takes on the appeals and not the fact-finding related to it. So that's part of that discussion and role clarification, because, like I say, our council, you do have to change a hat, and it's more than just the mental, because the whole basis for your decision making. And I don't say that lightly, because that's a challenge. You make decisions based on finding the facts, and is it consistent with whether the legislative decision is what would you like to do? There's certain rules and structures related to that, but it's a much broader. And that's why we come back to that conversation always about what's the facts that support the decision related to the applicant. You guys have to make the finding of facts, and I will tell you that is the hardest thing we struggle with on the council, because they've made their decision and then we have to go back and go, well, why did you do that? Well, that's right. So it's a nuance. It's part of our current DNA, just like, but at one point in time, this was the city of Yountville, and it changed. We've had certain citizen bodies and commissions come and go. There used to be a transportation advisory, I forget whether it was called a council or a committee, actually. I think that was a committee. And we're looking at certain different things. Now we have a Park and Rec Advisory Commission, and there wasn't one before. So I'm just saying, it's really, how do we look at what's the most appropriate way to meet our statutory requirements as an incorporated community and best serve the interests of the residents? And I would say there isn't one right or wrong. I want to make sure everybody understands what we're currently doing is not wrong. It's not illegal. Nobody's doing a bad job. It's just a question of, is this the appropriate process for the next generation of, And I think it's a healthy dialogue when we approach our 50th anniversary to look back at what served us well and where are we going as a community for the next 50.
Any other questions? How many master development plans do you think come before this town in the next 2 years, 3 years?
I think at least one, potentially two.
Mm-hmm.
We are reaching build outs, so you know that we have fewer opportunities for
That's
that.
right. All right. That's my only question. Did we have any comments from anybody in the audience as well? Additionally? No. Very good. So we'll get some comments from the commission members then on their thoughts on this. Commissioner Janes?
Well, I'm willing to be persuaded to listen more carefully to perhaps expanding the scope of the ZDRB's duties. My bedrock position continues to be small community, not a lot of development, small geographically, small population, and that as many decisions can be made closer to the ballot box, the better. I don't know that we have an issue of workload. We certainly don't. I suspect to a certain extent that the discussion is a solution in search of a problem.
Period.
That was good. I'm writing as fast as I can. Commissioner Cook? Thoughts?
I agree. I think there's room for us to take on a little more, and I appreciate the complexity of the issues that the town council addresses and the projects that come before them. And if there's some way that we can help, I think that's beneficial. And I think the more opinions that are out there, though sometimes it makes it more difficult, I think you come to better answers when you have more input and more opinions from different directions on projects. So if there are things that we could be more advisory on, or, I mean, even if we make decisions, then can the town council appeal our decisions, or does it have to be?
They can appeal your
Okay.
decisions.
So, I mean, they still
Or
have,
any individual member can.
okay, so they still have the ability to disagree and make it be known. I think there's a lot of benefits overall to the not the master development plan, but to the overall idea of what we can do and can provide the town. Those are kind of my thoughts.
Thank you. Commissioner Scoggins?
I tend to agree with Commissioner Janes that we might be looking for a problem. But with that being said, I'm also one to say we should, I don't know if it's called, go into ad hoc committee to have the discussion to figure out if there actually is a problem. Just to Steve Rogers' point of, how do we constantly keep in mind, making progress and looking forward into the future. And if we, having the conversation, if something comes of it that we turn over a rock and there is a problem, at least we're catching it preemptively and not, or being prepared preemptively rather than reactively. So, if the question is, do we want to set up a next meeting with the ad hoc committee, I would be in favor of doing something like that, just for the purposes of seeing how we could take on more and seeing if there's something we can do on behalf of the council that would make their lives easier or make the process go smoother in the future.
So, we're almost built out, maybe one or two master development plans. I find it hard to believe that the current council, who's going to be the current council for another 2 years, would give up a lot of those roles as well, just from my experience and what I've seen over the last 4 years now and going into the next 2 years. We had the ad hoc committee that updated a lot of the ordinances that Commissioner Jane was on. I just went to an ad hoc committee for the historical aspects of the town and what's going on, and those seem to work very well. I'm wondering now if the ZDRB has outlived its use after all that. But honestly, thinking about it and reading over everything that you have, given where we are, given the council that we have, why not just have ad hoc committees when this situation arises and the need arises? It's happened, and it's happening now, and it's working. So possibly, I mean, I still got to come back to the fact, and this is the thing that got me going when I went to the California League of Cities meeting for planning commissions and ZDRBs, was that the findings are based on facts. And I still come back to the fact that the garbage can at Stewart Cellars, which was discussed for probably 45 minutes or longer, was moved simply because one citizen in this town chose to write a letter. If that letter wouldn't have been written, that garbage can would have never been moved. I guess that's the fact, is that the letter was written so we could find that we need to move it, which I still think is funny. So therefore, that's what got me this impetus to me thinking that possibly we should be a planning commission, but maybe that's not the point anymore. Maybe we are built out. Maybe we only have another master development plan. Maybe we have a council in place that wants to continue to do this, which is fine. And we just have the ad hoc committees with citizens who want to participate at that time when it's needed. So those are my thoughts.
Interesting question, how we outlived our usefulness.
In this town.
But it takes, from being sort of a new member, it takes a long time to get up to speed on what our role is, my role is in the ZDRB. So having ad hoc committees to solve problems might be kind of difficult.
Understood. But I have I'm on the Historical Society, I have no history with that. But what I found today at that meeting was there's tons of resources in
True.
Napa County and in Napa and in the area that want to come and participate and support you. And so that was encouraging. And then you've got people like Commissioner Janes, who lives in the town, who has a background that lends itself perfectly to really digging into those ordinances and seeing what's outdated, seeing what needs to be changed, and seeing that as well be very effective. I mean, they did a great job. There's a lot of good stuff on there. So those things, and so, I mean.
And real quick on, just to pile on to what you're saying, it feels a lot like Sandra and staff, kind of put a package in front of people that's pretty easily digestible. And,
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
You kind of look at the last page and go, okay, I shouldn't admit that.
But there are design elements that still need to be reviewed in every project, don't you? I know I go around town and I look at things that have obviously been approved and been built and thought, geez, we really missed that, And, I mean, I'm thinking design review can do a better job of...
To the point, I'll just interject, of ad hoc committees, which I think are a valuable resource. They could never take any decision that's binding. Whether it's us or the council, appointed, elected, state reporting requirements, a list of duties, if it were design review by ad hoc committee, it won't work. It simply, it can't create a committee for...
Let the council meet twice a month instead of once a month and do design review. This town, if anything,
My
loves...
point,
Yeah, sorry.
my point was solely to the efficacy of ad hoc committees to take on some of the duties of whether it be of any planning review duties.
Correct.
And then I would only add, too, that if you were to disband the ZDRB, well, we'd have to find a place for all of your residential design review decisions, and you have 6 or more of those each year. We have a lot of redevelopment in Old Town where you see new residences. All of a sudden, the council would be taking on those decisions that they don't normally hear now. That decision is made here. in this body, by this body.
So the ad hoc committees obviously don't have any say, but they have. This town, if anything, loves...
They're formed for a certain purpose, so
Correct.
to take on the duties under state law for planning decisions, they wouldn't be able to do those.
Correct. No, I understand that. So I'm saying have the council meet twice a month instead.
If
And
I
have
may,
them do
a couple. One, the council generally does meet twice a month. There have been some schedule changes based on the meeting structures when the activity levels. But this is a fascinating conversation. So one, I'm really excited about it because I do think it shows some of the issues and the fact that there is room for discussion about what the role and the clarification and the consequences. Because one thing that I would say that we learn in Yountville, even as we approach build out, it doesn't mean the conversation's over. It doesn't mean that there isn't change. It doesn't mean that there's a question about what's applicable just on the dialogue today. It doesn't mean that we all agree necessarily on the design elements. There's opportunities to refine the design. And I think the conversation, if you choose to move forward with continuing with the ad hoc, and that's actually what I wanted to talk about. If you're not here, then it is not a ZDRB ad hoc council ad hoc committee working as two subsets to bring a recommendation. And I do agree that design by committee, review by committee, may not be in the community's best interest. Because I want to go to something that I think may be slightly lost by what Chair Durham is saying. Your job, and I will point out you're an advisory body, but your job, your charge, is to make a factual recommendation on the projects that you're asked based on conformance with the existing rules and regulations in the town. Based on that, not a politic. And I think one of the things that sometimes happens is if you put everything in the hands of the council, you potentially, one, you take out this kind of input, the ability for the community to come have a conversation with you as citizen advisors a little closer to their peers. It's a different kind of conversation than one has with the council. Not always necessarily utilized as, it'd be nice if there was a few more people having their thoughts on the value of the ZDRB, but that doesn't mean they don't. And you guys know from some of your meetings that there's been certain meetings when you'll look out and, whoop, the crowd looks a little different than tonight. So I think one needs to realize this really is an opportunity for the community to get the first opportunity to review, look at, provide some feedback. Because there's been some great opportunities when folks have said, this thing's not passing the initial test. You guys share that feedback. The applicant goes back, and what ultimately ends up going to the town council looks significantly different, but based on that citizen input. A concern that I would have, and I would echo what Member James is saying, committee review by people that just express an interest in it could be very problematic because they either could be incredibly supportive of the project, regardless of whatever. And that's what's really important is you guys don't really get to make a decision based on what you like. And I want to go back. You make decisions based on, is this project conforming to the rules in place that the town of Yountville had? And yes, you have some subjectivity as to, do you like the palette or the work? Did they put the architecture in? But ultimately, you come back and you make your decisions based on, is it? And that's an important thing in the role of a planning commission, and that's why you're a quasi-judicial body. Very different than a legislative body where you could just say, I don't really like the application. We don't need another house. I don't want to see another house. No, you have to make your review based on, does that house fit? Is it consistent with our requirements? Does it have setback? Is it all those things? And then we have the, how does it look? How does it fit within that? So fascinating conversation, and I think, it still may be appropriate, and it may be a healthy dialogue just to simply have where's everybody at with it. But an interesting discussion and divergence of points, and certainly proves that Citizen Advisory Board never surprises one.
Thank you very much. Any other thoughts from any of the commissioners?
No.
No? Thank you, Sandra. You have enough opinions and thoughts? Very good. Do we need to discuss an ad hoc committee for the council, with the council, for this issue?
There's already an ad hoc committee
Oh, okay.
comprised of 2 members of each body.
Oh,
So
okay,
we'll go ahead and take the next step and convene that meeting.
Okay, great.
I can't tell you which 2 of you sit on it. I don't remember.
I don't either.
So it's been a while
I
since
was on the
it was
historic
formed.
thing. I must have missed that.
Very good.
If you were here, you're on.
So we shall move on to 8.2 then. Another very
Yes.
limited topic that nobody has an opinion on, short-term vacation rentals.
This is another topic that arose from Chair Durham's attendance at the League of California Cities Planning Commissioners Academy. And when he returned, he shared with us how this is an issue that is evolving for communities, and they're deciding to approach short-term vacation rental bans in a different way. So we opened it up for discussion amongst the commission. Chair Janes indicated that he did not favor lifting the ban, and the other members seemed to be in agreement with that, but believed that there was merit in having this discussion as an educational item, and we can use this to get the word out to the community if we decide this ban will continue. After tonight's meeting, it will go to the town council, so they'll hear what your input is and then make a decision on how to proceed. So a vacation rental is when a home that's intended for permanent occupancy is rented for periods of less than 30 days. And it includes the habitable portion of a residence, such as the house itself or a second dwelling, a granny unit, but it wouldn't allow, or it wouldn't include such things as a garage. It doesn't generally apply to multifamily housing or housing subject to affordable housing agreement, nor would it apply to a home exchange where it's conducted outside of accepting a fee for that. So some of the background here in Yountville is that we have the 5 zoning districts, and short-term vacation rentals of 30 days or less are not permitted in any of those zones. The zones are really primarily intended for residential occupancy, and that's intended to protect the residential way of life and to segregate and keep commercial uses in the commercial zones. Here in Yountville, we have 11 different lodging establishments that offer just over 450 rooms to short-term guests to our community. Each of those establishments pays TOT, or transient occupancy tax, to the town. It amounts to about $6 million of the town's $9 million budget, so it's very significant. Lost my point there.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, the dollar signs just got me on that one. So the lodging uses are in the commercial parts of the town. We have had some experience with residents in town renting their residences for less than 30 days. We generally become aware of that activity through a neighbor complaint. Obviously, it's the neighbor next door who notices the change in cars and people every weekend, and may suffer some of the impacts of the use. So when we receive a complaint, we contact the owner in question and make sure that they're aware of the law and confirm that they're not violating the ordinance. That usually resolves all of the issues, and we don't further hear from the original complainant because it's generally solved. We also, though, do periodic investigations, let's say, of the different web pages. There's HomeAway, Airbnb, and VRBO, and that's where homeowners list their homes for rental. And there are always new properties being listed on those sites, so that's why we continue to monitor them. I would say that most of the listings indicate that it's a 30-day minimum stay, that they won't accept stays for less than that. It'll be the new listing that states a nightly fee, and we'll contact that owner. When we're able to identify the residents, as I mentioned in the staff report, we can't always tell when they're just inside photos of a residence. And then those owners would seem as if they're complying with the code, that these vacation rentals are very difficult to enforce. It could be that even though they're listing a property a certain way, that they're willing to accept a rental for a weekend, and without a complaint, we simply just don't know. This could be a bigger problem in Yountville due to the number of second homes in town that are vacant for most of the year, because the owners only use them occasionally. The rentals provide a way for the owners to finance the purpose, and we're in a tourist destination zone where it provides another opportunity for someone wanting to stay. They want kitchens and backyards rather than just a simple hotel room. We know that these vacation rentals may eat into the town's vacancy rate. That we show a vacancy rate of about 16%, but our latest housing element indicates that maybe 63% of those are second homeowners, so they're not really vacant houses on the market, and that has an impact leading to increased prices for rentals and just not a real large pool to choose from for renters. We know here in Napa County that the jurisdictions have approached the issue differently. In Napa, back in 2009, they were faced with a series of complaints, and they decided to change the law, allowing a certain amount of owners to obtain a permit for this transient type use. And they allocated a total of 72 permits, and that's 0.5% of Napa's total housing stock. And that was based on the number of people that were identified engaging in the activity in violation of their existing ordinance. Only about 2/3 of the people who were doing that activity have opted to actually pull a permit and to pay the fees and to pay the TOT. St. Helena also elected to go that route. That was back in 2012, and they'll allow up to a total of 25 vacation units, and they've seen that those permits have been taken out by owners too. I know from discussion with staff that some of those owners have pulled out permits, but they're not really renting their residence. It just keeps that option open. So the city's not really receiving the TOT that it had anticipated, and they're thinking that maybe it's more fair to circulate them to others if they're not used. Napa County, it's elected to go a different route, and they reiterated their ban on vacation rental. So they didn't open it up in the county. But over in Sonoma County, they decided to allow short-term vacation rentals, and they make up they contribute about $2 million in TOT in Sonoma. And Sonoma will allow vacation rentals in single-family residences. They're not allowed in multifamily. And they have a 2-tiered permit process with a zoning permit for a home with 5 or fewer bedrooms, and a use permit for more than 5 bedrooms. And the difference is that the zoning permit is specific to the owner, and if they sell the house, the use expires, while as a use permit runs with the land, and so that owner would, the new owner would step into the shoes of the old owner and be able to continue. That ordinance includes performance standards as to a whole host of different items, such as the maximum number of guest rooms, like I mentioned, the maximum number of overnight guests that are permitted, a maximum number of guests and visitors, period, at the residence. It requires on-site parking. It includes noise limits. It prohibits amplified sound and requires payment of TOT. So Sonoma also has an enforcement process for complaints, an investigation following multiple complaints, and potential revocation. So that's how they've decided to approach the issue. Yountville could choose to do something similar, similar to Napa and St. Helena, where we put a maximum number of rentals that are permitted in town, either the town as a whole or a neighborhood or a street, to avoid over-concentration, and then to develop these development standards for it. On page 3 of the staff report, I list some of the different components that would need to be considered, and I'll just mention some of them. It's requiring a license or permit, requiring payment of TOT. Would it require a sewer impact fee for the increased burden on the town sewer system? Would we require reporting for the number of days rented and the number of people accommodated? Would there be potential revocation if 2 complaints are received and if those can be verified? Would we require annual inspections or require on-site parking? How about establishing a complaint procedure? And so that very likely could lead to an impact on staff and the way we process these if it is something that were to become of interest to property owners and we were to see applications. We're a planning department of 1.5 people with limited resources, and it would all depend on the desirability of such a program. And, you know, just noting the number of second homes in town and the number of enforcements we're doing already on more an informal basis, I think it could be somewhat great. You know, the proponents and opponents of this, of allowing vacation rentals, cite very different things. Opponents state that there are impacts to the residential community, that these uses are inappropriate in residential zones, and that's why they belong in commercial zones, that they deprive renters of opportunities since these are out of the these are removed from the housing stock, that it increases the price of rents, that these residences are not constructed for commercial occupancies and may not meet fire, life safety, or ADA requirements, and that they don't pay TOT where they don't have the same level of costs as hotels. The supporters generally state that it allows them to finance their home, and it allows them to contribute to the local economy, that they're of low impact because the houses aren't occupied full time, and that it provides an alternative for those staying in town. So we're asking again that you hold another workshop to discuss these issues, and I've included, you know, 4 topics on the last page of the staff report. And should the town enable expanded opportunities for visitor-serving uses to support the tourism economy? And is opening this market to the residential neighborhoods negatively impact the town's tourist economy? And I mentioned that we have 450 hotel rooms that bring in $6 million in TOT. On the other hand, is it reasonable for a single-family residence to become part of this local tourism economy? And is the commercial use of a dwelling considered a commercial activity that's incompatible with the residential zone? Should the town take efforts to protect the existing housing stock and the residential land supply? And these are policies we already have in the general plan. If residential property is rezoned to commercial, there's a requirement that they address replacement housing for what would have been required of the site. And is the sort of commercial use as an overnight occupancy, does it likewise remove a unit from use? We also have housing element requirements for commercial development when it results in the loss of affordable housing. And granted, this doesn't probably apply to affordable housing, but it does reference the importance of those policies. And last, I mentioned just the enforcement issue for staff on limited resources. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you, Sandra. And just so you know, we view you as a full person and not a half. Okay, I just want to be clear with that, okay? Thank you very much. Commissioner Janes, your thoughts?
Strongly opposed.
Very good. Any questions?
None.
Thank you. Commissioner Cook, any questions?
I agree, but I always say it with more words. I agree with all the reasons that you cite to continue with the ban. I don't see any benefit to the people that own homes here. I think the town has a nice separation between its commercial area and its residential area, and I think it's really important to enforce that and to keep it that way. And I don't think there's any reason we should change that just to help people afford a second home in town.
Thank you. I agree with both the other commissioners on that matter, and without going too deep into it, I just feel like the negatives outweigh the positives, and really the positives only benefit, for the most part, the homeowner and not really the residents in the town. We want kids to go to our school here. We want people to shop at the non-tasting rooms and the non-restaurants, because those are viable businesses that need the support of their local town. And so I don't, even though I'm a capitalist and an entrepreneur, I have to say I don't think we should open this up.
Thank you. I think the way you spelled it out is really good, and I think that's part of the information that needs to be shared with the rest of the community as well. We got that insert in the water bill last month, but something more substantial to really drive the point home, and then people get the idea. The reason I wanted this discussed was as we look more towards long-term for Yountville, the next 5 to 10 years, and the general plan and all those things. And once you point them out this way, it becomes very obvious that it's doesn't work for this community, especially if 63% of the homes are second homeowners. It's amazing.
Vacant homes.
Vacant.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
63% of the 16%
Of the 16%? Yeah.
60% of our homes are vacant right
Of
now?
the 16.
63% of the 16% of our total housing stock, which is vacant, correct?
Oh, correct. 60% because of the veterans home,
That's even,
right?
That's
what
good.
you're getting at?
No, I'm getting at the net percentage of vacant
Vacancies,
second homes, which I think is something,
16%.
16%.
and
Of those
60%.
16%.
That's what I keep saying.
yeah,
Thank you.
I hear
Very
you.
good. Very good. So I think the more we can get that information out to a lot of the points you made. Yes, Commissioner.
I'm sorry, I should know the answer to this question, but just going back a big step to we can't rent for less than 30 days. Can a homeowner rent a house for a weekend every 30 days?
There may be an argument that doesn't run afoul of the law.
I will clarify any doubt about does that follow the law. The law is a 30-day rental.
Continues.
So what that means is the person is supposed to be having a contract to rent the whole property for the 30-day or longer.
Right.
No.
My point is maybe they're renting it for 30 days, but they're staying a weekend. Something like that would
Right.
not.
The challenge that the town will be faced with, and one that we need the participation of our residents, is to help us with enforcement. Because, as Sandra has pointed out, we have some second homeowners, and I'll be honest, we have some longtime owners that have decided they want to do something else and then look at this as an alternative. But I do think the community made a conscious decision a number of years ago that has worked for this community. And as you've, in your brief but very poignant discussion, have kind of said, the benefits generally are for the individual property owner, not for the community as a whole. And this was a conscious decision, because I've had some people say, oh, you do that to protect the hotels. And actually, no, it's not done to protect the hotels. Was never done, wasn't started. It was to protect the integrity of the residential neighborhood. I think, every once in a while it is appropriate for us to have these kind of conversations, even though they sometimes seem like a no-brainer after we have them. But sometimes it's important to take stock and go, does this still make sense? Because probably, I'm going to suggest about half of the new homeowners that we occasionally get that clearly buy them as second homes come in and want to know how they can apply for their vacation rental permit. And they're somewhat shocked when we tell them, you can't. And thank you, you're now on our list.
Where was that address?
And we don't say that in a negative, but the thing is,
Sure.
to your point, that's not the intent. The housing stock was built to house the residents of the town. The commercial corridor was built to allow for the commercial pursuit. And it's not that friends and family can't visit. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the conscious business decision and the impacts that it has on adjacent residents. We will be honest, it is something that we could probably employ a full-time staff person and a detective, and there are still people. I don't want to give any impression that we've caught all of the people that might do this, because it requires a set of circumstances and information. But we do have monitoring mechanisms in place, and they move around and they change a little. And so I'll just let folks know, we do attempt to rent. And when somebody signs up and they let us rent, then we have a violation, and we go through a process. So we generally are communicating to anywhere to 4 to 6 people a year after our big initial cycle, just to keep them. And so it's an issue, and it's one that we'll continue to monitor consistent with that policy.
Wouldn't it be beneficial that people know that you do those kind of things?
It is, and we do this.
I
One
was
of the
unaware
things
of
that
that.
I have not been
I mean, just-
successful with, a number of local boards of realtors, actually, they have a little section where you can have an add-on that's relevant to the real estate market. I would really love for us to be able to have a disclosure that goes into the real
Yes.
estate sales for property, and a lot of regions do this. The Tahoe Basin has if you buy or sell property up there, they pull out this little thing that says, if you live in this zoning district, you're covered by TRPA, and here's a bunch of things you need to be aware of. Here's a bunch of other things you need to be aware of. Here's another. I think it would be really great for us to have the ability, if our real estate community would work with us, to say, this is strictly prohibited in Yountville. Do not even pretend to think that your purchase of this property can be supported by your converting this to a vacation rental. Don't think the real estate community would actually. We haven't had success in gaining that support, but I do think that's really the message. And I do think, to your point, we'll use some of the staff report, and Sandra and Nathan can figure out how to make it a nice profile article coming up to explain why we do it. We'll focus on the why, which is to protect the neighborhood integrity. Because I do think we have to keep that message out, because we do have 20 to 25 homes a year sell, and some of those folks may not be aware. So it's a re-education issue.
And I think there's a lot of people that know of somebody or a address that does this, and they're afraid to make the phone call.
Some are.
Can there be an online form? I know Napa has an online form.
Well, I think part of that is that's in part to the regulatory compliance. That's why they have that. That's where people are sending information. The challenge that we have in enforcement is somebody has to be telling us what it is they're seeing and what the proximity is. So what happens generally, and I'm going to use an example, I don't want to tell you who I am, but there's a problem at so-and-so, and you need to take care of it. That doesn't give us any ability to actually help manage it, because in many cases we need to get a witness statement, we need an identification of the behavior they're seeing, what's the frequency, and unfortunately we do need a certain level of engagement by our residents in order to help them.
But we don't ever disclose the name of the complainant.
Right.
That's strictly
Right.
anonymous.
Yeah. But just
but
getting
there's
all
a
that
fear.
information out there so that people would feel comfortable calling if they know, in fact, that this is going on.
Is that protection of anonymity for all code enforcement?
The downside, that I'm just going to be really honest, it's a small community. So while we don't disclose names, if somebody is calling to complain about their barking dog, and the owner of the barking dog knows the two people that are more inclined to complain about the barking dog, there's a very good chance that they will either think either one or the both of them did. So we do our best, but we certainly know that some of the adjacent neighbors and property owners have had less than polite conversations with whom they think may have ratted them out.
Sure.
So to Member Cook's point, though, if you had maybe just a checklist of here's what you should be looking for if you're going to complain,
That's a good idea.
because you just said
Yeah.
a couple things, and you just said a couple things. I'm like, oh, I didn't know you had to check this box and check that box, and then you should probably,
Here are some
if
things
it all
to look
equals
for.
to make a
It's-
phone call,
yeah.
here you go.
What it
There you
is it's really helpful. It's just that if we haven't witnessed it, we can't use the information. It's all hearsay. So we need the statement from the person that's seen, observed, been a party to it, or done something.
But you
And
can use the residents' statements of what
that's
they've
exactly.
seen.
That's
Yeah.
because that's not
Yeah.
hearsay.
Right.
Well, and it depends on what level of proof we need, depending on where we are in the enforcement process. A more casual phone call to let staff know of the problem will lead to a letter and start the discussion. If we have a repeated violator, like I mentioned in the staff report, we had to go to a different level of getting certified responses from the neighbors, of doing a sting operation with a third-party, person. And so when you go to court, you just need a whole different level of proof. We don't
Yeah.
always need that to get
No,
started
I
with
wouldn't
an
think so.
enforcement.
Right, and I think that, to Sandra's point, the level the town does is, we do more than just say, please don't do it. There is a level of enforcement, and we've generally been successful. Sometimes it requires us to get to steps short of going to court. In some cases, we've done the sting investigation, and when they realize they get caught, they become more compliant. Not always, but in most cases, when they realize that and they realize we've caught them and they understand the consequences, they're generally a little more willing and receptive to work with us on resolution.
But the more people that know that, they might be more reluctant to give it a shot.
A self-diagnosis for the neighbors, or like, here's the symptoms that,
Yep,
that may
let's-
be helpful.
And we can put some of that, it may be helpful to do more of that as a standing component on our website as well, so that, because sometimes we can put more detailed information and the ability to interact on that. And we will be doing an overhaul of our website in the next 6 months and trying to revamp and make it even more user-friendly and have more information. So this would certainly be one of those components that we can put a little extra time into to make it easier. Again, if we have the fields and the forms, so like you're saying, if we can make it easier to make sure that helps us be able to be more responsive and more timely with the response.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments from the commissioners?
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. And we'll move on to 9 for staff and board reports.
Well, I have on here elected chair and vice chair because we've moved that from July to the September meeting. I believe it was in September of last year that we elected the chair and vice chair, so it would be up for reconsideration
Okay.
tonight.
Any discussion from the commissioners?
I think what we have works really well.
Call me General Sherman.
I was going to nominate Commissioner Laz, but okay.
Lucky.
Fair enough, huh?
So then the consensus or the opinion is to move forward with the current chair and vice chair? Is that okay with the current vice chair?
As long as you guys can put up with me butchering the when I'm standing in for you, it's fine.
Absolutely.
So
No
by
great
acclamation? Okay.
All right, very good. So we shall move forward with the current chair and vice chair.
Comedy
Okay.
relief.
All right. So that moves us to the adjournment to our next meeting, which will be scheduled for October 14th, 2014.
Oh, my birthday?
Although
You make me do this.
Yes.
on my
Oh,
we're
sorry.
adjourned.
Yes.